just a welcome from Brad to Kobe. Thank you for joining us tonight. We wanted to have a bigger event, and that was the original plan. We wanted to keep it small and intimate, but obviously we live in a new world, which is part of the discussions for tonight. So we had a lot of people that were kind of just under the new regulations. They were like, look, this is not something that I want to do right now, go to these kinds of events. So I think it's a hot topic, right? For us, just from trying to organize an event, we face challenges. Trying to build teams, we face challenges. Trying to do basically everything we have to do now is a whole new set of challenges for us. So it's nice to see some familiar faces from the wine tasting series. Welcome back, guys, and some new faces. So for the new faces, you haven't heard the pitch before, but essentially OfferZen, we're a South African company, so we're from Cape Town, as I explained earlier. We're a tech talent marketplace, which basically means software developers and software makers come online, they create a profile, and you can hire them. So very much like Talent.io, Honeypot, those kinds of companies. So we've launched very recently in the Netherlands. And our approach in South Africa has always just been community. So we've never really been that good at sales or B2B marketing or anything like that. In South Africa, we really just built it up from doing stuff with community. Whether it's something like this or a big couple of hundred people conference, we've kind of played that game for 5 years now. And in South Africa, we've just reached our 100,000th sign up on the talent side, and we recruit for about 1,600 companies, and we're starting to build up that momentum here. We've got some cool companies on board. But really our strategy is just to do things that add value to the community, and so far that works out for us. And that's the plan here. So that's what we're doing tonight. So we know a lot of people couldn't come tonight, and they said, will it be recorded? So we said, let's make a plan to get it properly recorded. So you'll see the guys that are there. So the people at home watching this is for you, thanks. So tonight really about adding value. And we thought, okay, what can we do to add value to kind of this community? And when we discussed that, I was thinking of the person that epitomizes this field to me. And I'll tell you how I met Brad. I was actually interviewing at a company, and Brad was on the other side of the desk, so I was the candidate. And I remember thinking to myself after the conversation, geez, that company is going places. I actually want to join that company, that culture seems great. And I think from an employer value proposition, sorry about the flattery so early on, but I think from an employer value proposition perspective, if you can be that person sitting on the other side of the desk and leave a candidate feeling like that, you probably know what you're doing. So I thought Brad probably knows what he's doing. It would be great to have a conversation with him and get him to share some of his insights. So Brad's worked at a bunch of cool companies. He'll tell you a little bit about that. But he's overqualified and also underqualified for this. But yeah, so we're very grateful to have you here tonight, Brad, so thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting me. When you reached out and asked me to come, I was instantly eager to get out of the house, anything to get out of the house. So thanks for the invitation and for the flattery. It's a funny memory that you just shared because, and I'll explain a little bit about my background, but I ended up in a role where I was leading HR for a relatively large multinational company as a big surprise for me because it wasn't part of my career path, and I ended up in HR sort of through a background of general management and marketing, and that's a different story. But what I learned about myself is that I'm a lousy interviewer. Actually, I really suck at interviewing candidates, and one of the reasons is that I discovered is that I sort of fall for everybody who I interview because I see lots of possibilities in people. So I tend to sort of draw people out, and I can always find the narrative of why a candidate is special and it has an opportunity to sort of contribute or grow. And so what I discovered is that, and people who are asking me to interview candidates were like, every single time you come back and you're like, this person's great. And so then I realized that actually what I really like to do is get people excited about the work that we do. And then I realized that my role in that type of a setting would be to try to get someone like you enthusiastic about the work as opposed to assessing whether you were good or not. So that was somebody else's decision to make actually in that situation. anyway, I'm delighted to be here, and there's lots of different things we can end up talking about, and I hope it becomes a conversation rather than just a dialogue. But I do love to talk, and I have a lot of things I like to talk about, so this could go anywhere. So maybe I'll follow your lead in terms of where you want to take this.
Yeah, maybe I think for a bit of context, maybe give us a little bit of the story, because it's non-traditional, especially within this field. Maybe you can give a little bit of a story, the highlights of how you end up here talking to us about this when you've got the title CMO right now.
Yeah, good. So it's hard to know how far back to start, but after university in the U.S., I born and raised essentially in California, in what is the heart of the technology world with respect to Silicon Valley. Grew up across the street from Hewlett-Packard, effectively, and but I was never involved in tech early on. It's just sort of I found it later. I actually wanted to work in professional sports, but I was a crappy athlete, and I thought that, but I love sports, and I thought, oh, this is great. I'd love to work in the business side of sports, and I wanted to get involved in sports marketing. And I did some of that, but then I realized that actually working in sports really sucks. Because actually you're working when you want to be sitting in the stands actually as a fan. So working in entertainment and sports sounds really great, but actually I'll tell you right now, tech is way better. I ended up going to business school, and then I found my way into tech. I spent most of my business career in early stage consumer-facing technology companies. Mostly loss-making companies, mostly marketplaces. I worked at, my exception with that would be I spent 4 years at eBay. But I also worked places like Elance, so you'll be familiar with what is now Upwork. I was a CMO at what was then Elance. I worked at Yelp as an early employee, so if those of you who know the business review site. And I think that the common thread was what I really found myself enjoying a lot was these early stage, anything goes kind of starting, sort of I guess what you would call a scale up. Not exactly a startup, but more of a scale up. So I found myself in these early stage companies in typically marketing roles. But anybody who's worked in a small company knows that you end up doing lots of different things. And what I learned is that I liked that. I like the environment where things are changing all the time and you're learning and growing all the time. And the result of that is that I ended up jumping around a lot because after a couple of years I would tend to get bored. And like I fall for candidates interviewing people, I also fall for ideas and companies as well. So after I would master something in a company, then somebody else would come knocking on my door and I'd be like, ooh, what's going on over there? That sounds exciting. So then I guess the other relevant part of my story, though, is that I did spend a good 10 plus years hustling in Silicon Valley, had young kids, 2 jobs, both my wife and I were working. The hustle is real. And those of you who are essentially now hustling in COVID times with young families and juggling life and career understand what that feels like. And my wife and I decided that we wanted to have an overseas experience, something we had committed to a long time earlier in our lives when we had gotten married. And so I ended up flying out to Singapore where I knew some people. I was in California, so Asia was more my orientation. I got on a plane, I spent 13 days in Singapore interviewing with every company I could, and I scrounged up a shitty offer with a shitty company and came home and said, pack our things, we're moving. And that was in 2010. My mindset at the time was, this is not about career, this is about, I had a 5 and 8 year old kid, this was like a last minute to get out and go do something and before coming back. And what I was assuming was it would re-energize my passion for Northern California. So it's beautiful, there's a lot of opportunity, the people are great, the lifestyles, all that's great. I was enjoying none of that because I was in that life stage. So we said, let's go for 2 years, we'll come back and then we'll reset. And I'm here now on year 10 of my 2-year plan. Life sort of happens this way. So yeah, I mean, I think to wrap that up, I ended up leaving that shitty little company a year after I was there. I ended up interviewing and joining somebody who I knew from my eBay days, who was running the region for Aspers, which is the company that I then joined. thinking that this would be something I would do for a year or so, and now I'm nine years in a variety of roles within the company.
Right. So so then you ended up doing kind of head of HR role, like head of people. How did you end up doing that? Tell us that story.
Good question. So when I was hired in that role in Aspers, what it was imagine you have let's say a parent company who's made a bunch of investments in entrepreneurial companies. In this case, they were in the region in Southeast Asia, and what they were looking for, what the parent company in Aspers was looking for, was somebody like myself who had experience working in these companies, who could sit with the founders and with the management teams and help them grow their business. So at our company, we had people who were doing lots of deals, M&A, and then there's other people like myself who were working operationally with the companies. So my role was to work with the portfolio of companies and to help them ultimately succeed. That evolved into we formed eventually an operating company within our group. And this was basically, imagine that we had a bunch of disparate investments in similar online classifieds companies. So we're here in the Netherlands now, and Marktplaats would be the best example of what I'm talking about. In South Africa, you have OLX and Gumtree, but these types of businesses. We had a bunch of these businesses in Southeast Asia, and we rolled them up into a single sort of operating company, if you will. And my role then was sort of the general manager of that portfolio. And we also had portfolios of similar companies all around the world. And that portfolio that I was managing was doing well in certain dimensions, but it wasn't performing in the way that I would have liked, as well as our parent company would have liked as well. And there was a moment in time where we did a reorganization, and the boss who I have worked for through most of my time now at Aspers, I love to tell the story, but I was flying to the Netherlands where we have a headquarters, and he invited me to have a breakfast, and I said, oh great, let's have breakfast. And then he said, yeah, so I have a new idea for you. And I was like, well, no, but I'm busy, I've got so much to do. And he's like, no, but I think you should seriously consider running HR for us globally. And I was like, it came out of the blue, because I'd never worked in HR. And I said, look, I've never worked in HR, I don't know what I'm doing. And he says, don't worry about it. You'll figure it out. I was like, nah, but I kept saying, nah, I'm not sure. And he's like, no, I think you should really think about it. Which was a euphemism for, yeah, you better do this, because this is your future destiny. And of course, it was super shocking and scary at first, because again, I was super insecure about the fact that I didn't really know what I was doing. And then I think I began to realize that actually the parts of my work that I loved the most as a general manager was hiring great teams, aligning them around common goals, building the culture of the company, all of the things that are essentially related to the people. And once I began to sort of realize that that's the part that I got energy from and I think I was best at, and I realized I could actually then apply that to a broader set of opportunities and so forth, then I said, hey, actually, you know what? Why not? Let's give this a try. And so that ended up kicking off what ended up being a 4-year stint as a global head of HR for a company with, at the time when I moved out of that role, 6,000 employees in 25 countries. So I learned a hell of a lot. And I think one of the things, just to conclude that, I think one of the things that was really interesting about it was I was brought in as a business person who learned HR, as opposed to an HR person who had to learn the business. And I think you see this a lot in companies, and this is becoming, I think, a bit more common.
So you mentioned you learned a lot of lessons during that. Is there any particular highlight that you've put as TLDR at the bottom of that chapter of your biography?
I've written a lot about that, the learnings, just to reflect on it. I think one of the ways I could answer this would be to say that going into it, admitting that I was already lost and didn't know what I was doing, was maybe the smartest thing that I did in entering the role. In other words, I think sometimes you hear this feedback all the time, which is sort of fake it until you make it, and just as long as you're confident, everything will be fine. I had that confidence already because I knew the business. So that piece was easy for me. It was all the stuff I didn't know that was more causing me insecurity. And What I learned was that by basically calling that out and saying like, hey, I don't really know how to answer this question, and asking for help, that actually was really empowering, because then people then wanted to help me, as opposed to maybe expecting me to then make a bad decision and then second guess it. So I mean, I think that, again, it comes with a little bit of experience to be able to have the comfort level to say I don't know, but I think that actually is a really powerful thing that we can all bring to our jobs. And just one more point to add to that would be, sometimes I like to say to people, like, if you're not feeling uncomfortable in your role in terms of, that you're being asked to do something you don't know how to do, or it's bigger than you think you can handle, or this type of a thing, then I like to say you're in the wrong role. Right. Like, everybody should always have some feeling of this discomfort, and if you don't have the discomfort, then you're not growing in a way you could.
So you mentioned taking on roles and leadership roles per se without that much subject matter expertise, right? And that leads to a certain level of discomfort. But maybe we can get to kind of the topic of the evening, and you guys please feel free to participate on this. One of the things we discussed when we were chatting beforehand is leadership and what it means to lead without formal authority. So I can't imagine what it means to lead without subject matter experience, and we've got some kind of guidance from you on that. But you mentioned something that's kind of interesting to you, and it definitely piqued my interest. Yeah. Do you mind kind of unpacking that for us and letting us know where your head's at?
Yeah, and Brandon and I were talking about this just before the session started as well. So this is a topic that I like a lot, and it has to do with it starts with what is the difference between management and leadership. And I like to say that the simplest way to think about this is people follow managers because they have to, but people follow leaders because they choose to. And if you think of it as in those simple terms, you can begin to think about the people in your life who you've been inclined to follow from a leadership perspective. So if you think about a good leader, they have followership. I mean, that's the definition of a leader, is there's followership. And I think what comes to mind for me is that there's a lot of confusion often between what it takes to be a great leader. And I think people mix up the difference between being a high-powered manager and a great leader. And the mix-up usually comes from people who are a bit inexperienced, who think that, well, as soon as I have a bigger team, or as soon as I have the bigger budget, or as soon as I get promoted, then I can become the leader that I really want to be. And what I would then say to people like this is like, it's a bit too late for that. It's not too late, but these two things are disconnected. And I encourage people to think about how to decouple that. So what is the difference? I mean, one is, so you mentioned the phrase, which I think is important, and that is formal authority. So you follow a manager because you have to, because they have the formal authority over you. Your line manager or management has formal authority. Whereas leaders don't require formal authority to get things done. Leaders are able to get things done through others when they don't even have the formal authority. They get things done through others because people want to help. They want to join in. They want to participate. And so what does that look like? And I don't have the answer for what that looks like. I have my own. When I think about the people who I like to follow and the leaders who I admire, they do things like setting good context in terms of, hey, where is all of this going? They do a good job of framing problems in a way that I can understand and resonate with. They tend to really praise people in public and then maybe criticize in private. They tend to give credit to others when things are successful. They tend to take accountability for themselves when things aren't. These are the kinds of things that I notice in the leaders that I admire and follow myself. But I think leadership is a unique style that people have to find. In light of that, I think the most important thing that a great leader has is authenticity. So they are true to who they are and what they believe in. That authenticity becomes contagious. Like, you're around somebody who is authentic and you're like, wow, I'm interested in hearing more. I want to be around that person more. I want to participate in, hey, if there's something that they're doing, I'm going to sort of lend an ear and maybe join in. And next thing you know, you're part of it. So this notion around the formal authority versus informal authority, and following because you choose to and following because you have to, ends up sort of creating, you can sort of imagine a 2x2 matrix around this. And sometimes I tell people there's a little bit of a progression that often happens in people's careers. And the first box is you're an individual contributor and you're good and things are great and you're enthusiastic and you're getting things done and you've gotten good feedback from your manager and from management. And so what happens next? You get promoted and you get a team. You get a few people who are working for you. And that's exciting. That's great. And now all of a sudden I have a team and that's great and I can tell people what to do, right? I can boss people around. This is awesome. And people make the mistake at this level of then thinking, well, my job is to then tell people what to do. And the reason I got promoted to this role is because I'm good at what I do. Therefore, I have to be good at everybody else's job too. And what a good manager will do is actually knock down barriers for people and get out of the way, set a clear direction, clarify objectives and intent, provide resources, help solve problems, but then create room and space for people to get their stuff done. The problem is that people tend not to have that guidance and they tend to then try to micromanage, they tend to try to control everything, which then ultimately they might be able to be successful with a small team doing that, in which case they might get promoted a second time, in which case now you have a much bigger team and there's no way you can then keep that up because that means you have to be involved in everything all the time and then you become a gatekeeper. So that kind of management is a bit more like this hierarchical, it's a bit old school, right? If you think about the way that the companies were, at least when I was coming up, there was a lot more, how big is your empire? How many layers of people are you managing? How big is your team, et cetera? Whereas I think today, the work environment is a lot more fluid. It's a lot more, there's the term VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, I don't know. 3 out of 4 ain't bad. But it basically sort of means, hey, look, everything's chaotic all the time. So setting up an organization like a hierarchy, if it works, you're lucky. It's just pure luck because the world is moving so quickly. There's no way to then move your armies in a way that's agile enough. So therefore, it means that your style has to also adapt. And that means that your ability to flow into roles has to also be able to adapt. So what it means is sometimes you're a leader and you're leading a project, and sometimes you're a contributor, and sometimes you're a supporter, and sometimes you're a consultant or whatever. But people have to learn how to flow in these kinds of ways. And these are the ones who end up, people who are successful doing that are the ones who end up becoming the inner circle of an organization. And the people who are used to just bossing people around are left out. And they often wonder why. They think, hey, I've been doing great. I've gotten good feedback. I have a great team. I've been promoted, but I've hit the wall now. So it's a lot in there. But hey, by the way, there's one other metaphor that probably many of you have heard when it comes to this notion around leadership and management. But and that is the metaphor of the orchestra conductor, right? So the job of if you go to the symphony, the job of the orchestra conductor is to make sure that things are on time. And that the volume is appropriately loud here and quiet here and fast here and slow there. But it's to orchestrate. It's not to actually play the instruments. And I think poor managers think their job is to tell the violinist how to play her instrument. But actually, that's not the job of the orchestra leader. The orchestra leader needs to rely on her expertise. She's a specialist. His or her job as the orchestra leader is to actually make sure that we're in harmony and see the bigger picture. And I think that's also a metaphor that is a useful one when it comes to thinking about what we really want, which is you want a symphony that is resonating. I was blessed with having worked for people who I admired and respected earlier in my career, and sometimes I would think to myself, what would he or she do in this situation? And that would be a good roadmap for me. What I see in tech is that you have a lot of really young, whip-smart people who have been successful in their studies and in their work, and then they've been told they're great. And let's face it, technical people can be, if we're talking about techies themselves, they can be prima donnas. They can be told they're great. And so, the reality is that they just haven't had the experience. So they only follow what they know. And their experience is working, like if you're 23 and your experience is working for a 27-year-old, it could be amazing. On the other hand, you have no other point of reference. So if that 27-year-old who is considered a star in a company, but is a real jerk and has a management style that is uninspiring, then you think, well, that person's successful. That's what a real manager is supposed to do. When I get promoted, that's what I will do. So there's a lot of follow the leader problems that we need to sort of solve.
I totally agree with you, but how do you make sure that the company, because every CEO or every founder or whatever you want to call it has a bottom line. Like, hey, bottom line, I want to make money. I want to be successful, and in order to be successful as a company, because the only company I've ever experienced that is Netflix, where I used to work, where truly the people management was, it was centered around the people management. And all the other companies that I worked for, it was great, and it was in their values, and it was, oh yeah, we're going to pretend to do that, but it came down to the bottom line every single time. So how do you instill that in young scale-ups?
How do you do it at Netflix?
So at Netflix, the time I was at Netflix, it was more organic, so a lot of role modeling. So they took a lot of senior people from Los Gatos, they flew them over here in Amsterdam to really role model the behavior. I know they're getting more into L&D right now, but they very much wanted it to be organic and people to role model that behavior. So that's how Netflix did it. But then again, you know, Netflix also has the money to have people make mistakes, and sometimes these scale-ups don't have that, and they just want to be someone, get the job done, get it done right, and that almost becomes more important than the people aspect of it. So I was just wondering how you would advise someone if you see that in a scale-up, because there's so many parts moving at that point.
You touch on something that I think is super important here, and that is that implicitly what you're saying is this is all great, but if the results aren't being delivered, it's not going to work out. And in the end, that's true. In the end, results do end up speaking for themselves. I guess it's a question of, can you create a culture that allows people to have the ability to maneuver to create those results? Netflix is a great example of that. Netflix, by the way, also doesn't accept mediocrity. So, you know, I think you'd know more than I do, but what I know about the company is like, you could be damn good, but then there'll be, you'll reach a limit and then you get sort of pushed. I mean, I think so the standards are ridiculously high, ridiculous, like probably inappropriate at some levels, but that also creates a culture of its own. But the results speak for themselves. But not every company can be like that. So it's a good question. I don't have the answer for it, because I do think that the trap that let's say enlightened management, what we're talking about here, the trap that enlightened management runs into is to say, well, hey, I'm doing all these right things. I'm empowering my team. I'm communicating well. I'm hiring great teams and setting goals and creating this culture. But the results aren't there. Well, now what? And I think that's where the rubber meets the road. And I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I think if the results aren't happening, the results aren't happening, and you have to move on.
What I would ponder on that point is, you all work in tech companies, right? And we have a lot of experience in this space. And generally, it's quite synonymous with like venture capital and like early stage businesses running and scaling before reaching profitability, or trying to like hit certain targets that funding was raised against and those kinds of things. So it feels like in the old days, or in more traditional businesses where you validate your business model and slowly scale it up and it becomes a McDonald's or a Ford or something like that, there seems to be more of an appetite for time. And time seems to be the enemy of this like long-term investment in, you know, learning from a manager, bringing in a role model, that kind of stuff. Because if I can choose a role model or someone who spends his, what did you call them, GIF coins every day and cracks the whip. If I've got a certain milestone to hit for my funding, which is the space we operate in, perhaps it's that nature of the business which makes it difficult, combined with your role models and the young, kind of generally the young employees, potentially.
I think the pressures are high whether you're in an early stage startup to meet numbers or at a giant, the biggest company in the world. I think either way, the pressure to deliver is there. I agree the timing may be different. That's a bit of a challenging issue. In the end, you still need to get things done through others. And I do think that the quotient of successful jerks in early stage companies is higher than maybe in a bigger corporate environment. That's a hypothesis. I don't have the data to back that up, but
I agree. I think when my previous company, when we got to that level to raise the Series A funding, we saw a lot of managers trying to become top performers again, and I think that became like a really toxic environment because, time was not on our side, but we had to reach a certain milestone to get that Series A in, and I think that was when I look back at those were toxic managers and definitely not the leaders you want to follow because they want. I don't know how you guys think of it, but you cannot be a manager and a top performer at the same time, right? At least not in my opinion.
And how did those behaviors manifest themselves when you think about that toxic behavior? What did that?
No, it's when you say you need to set someone up for success and you need to teach them. It wasn't teaching anymore. It's like I'll show you how it's done, and
right,
that's the arrogant manager, which is toxic in my opinion.
So when we're looking, you guys spend a lot of time out there in the field thinking about finding these impactful people, not the jerks, not the toxic managers. The first question, I suppose, is do you consider this role model element? Because that for me is quite an interesting first discovery. Do you guys factor that in? Yeah? On saying like, look, this is someone with a lot more management experience, and bringing someone like that will have exponential kind of impact on the rest of their managers within the
I
organization.
think for a scale up, because if you're talking about like they tend to be too expensive for a scale up, but you can bring them in as a mentor, as a coach, more in that role, that do a consultancy type thing for a young management team. But I do think that there are young managers who, and that's why I say can it be taught or art, or do you embody it? That completely embody that whole people-centric management. And I think, especially if you're in this space, then you know the people that you need to reach out to. But I would never recommend or hire someone who wouldn't have people on first thing in his mind when you talk about management.
Yeah, I think the other conversation we had earlier was just the additional effort that it requires, right? So your question, I think, talking about how much work it is to actually have empathy, for instance, now, especially now, right? To even understand context of a Zoom, to look behind the Zoom curtain and understand how that person's showing up and all that additional effort. In the hiring space, has that changed, the real world versus Zoom stuff? Like, can you not see behind the curtain, or is it still the same?
Well, I think a lot of people try to implement tools for that now. I think tooling is a big factor. I actually worked for a company in pre-assessment, but it's never the same. Like you need to sit on the other side of the table to get a true feeling of someone's personality. Or
Do you really think that?
you can always fake an assessment. You can never fake a 4-hour multiple stakeholder interview. Or you need to be an actor. But you can fake a test. You can always fake a test. Or you say this is what I would answer, but.
Yeah, I kind of agree also with these personality tests.
Yeah,
you know what they're looking for, especially if you're in the HR. Come on. You know what the answers they are looking for. So they want someone who can lead, someone who's people focused, etc. You can you can fake the test. I agree.
I agree that the technology is not there yet, but don't you think we're moving into that direction? Because I fully agree. Like, I don't think there's any technology out there, smart AI or whatever, that really now can replace the human element, if you will. But do you think we will get there very soon? Because if you look at, like, in Palo Alto, there's some very interesting AI interviewing tools that are pretty good.
Yeah, but I'm going to say no, otherwise we will be out of jobs. But yeah, I think now it's going to be sort of a pitch of my old company. I think for low entry positions, I think yes, we can probably predict success in some kind of roles and we can match personality, but I think for leadership roles or the true leader in your company, you always need the human factor, in my opinion.
I disagree.
So if we can bring it back to Brad, so your latest blog post is largely about America, which is your home country. But one of the interesting topics that you bring up in that blog post is this duality of conservatism and progressivism, if I'm saying those words correctly. But it's basically this conversation of, look, do we hold on to the human interaction because that's the thing we trust and know and it's this thing, or do we figure out the AI new world and embrace that reality? And you talked about that balance for.
I was wondering how you're going to tie that to this.
So you're talking about that balance for a country, right, in politics, but in this space, this is our new frontier, right? It's, do we hold on to the old or do we go heads first into the new, and where do you land on that?
Cool, yeah. Thanks for connecting that for me, because I was how is he going to do this? Right, so the gist of what I tend to write to sort of pressure test my own ideas, and in this case it happened to be about what's happening in the US. And I was inspired by another blog I've read, it's called Wait But Why, and the author talks about the balance between what it means to be progressive versus what it means to be conservative. And the way he describes it in simple terms is that if you're a progressive, it means that you believe that the world is going to, both camps want the world to be better. And if you're a progressive, it means that you think the world's going to get better through progress and through pushing and through embracing new ideas fully nonstop. And then if you're a conservative, it means that you're essentially holding on to what's been successful in the past and conserving, essentially, and making sure that you essentially you don't progress so quickly as to lose what has gotten you there. And the thesis is that you need both, actually. And what I wrote about is that what's going wrong in the U.S., in my view, is that both the progressives are pushing, it's a car, and the progressives are pushing the accelerator pedal at full blast, and the conservatives are stomping on the brake pedal fully on, and they're both at the same time, and it's just madness. But the reason that Stephen's connecting these dots here is that if you think about technology, how it might help or how it's going to drive things like recruiting and assessments and these kinds of things, then you have this dialogue that you're referring to, right? And I think the principle is the same, which is you need both. In fact, we need to test and press forward with how can we improve our hiring results and outcomes through technology, through assessments, through tools, through systems, through experimentation and trying new things. But at the same time, let's not go all in on these things without also understanding that seeing somebody eye to eye for 4 hours, getting a feel for how they are in the room, understanding what they're like when they're hungry, and seeing how cranky that they get, and maybe seeing what happens when they get a drink in them and what comes out of their mouth. I mean, these types of things actually are sort of a bit old school, but at the same time also to some degree important in conserving the art of building these teams. So I think there's.
But I also think, based from a candidate experience, is also very important, because now we very process from the employer point of view. However, if somebody has multiple offers or whatever, and have been in contact with people through Zoom, you don't have that candidate experience, you don't have a feeling about the culture, you want to see the office, you want to see some people, some interactions, maybe how the lunch goes or whatever. Those elements are also very important, especially if you have multiple jobs on the table, you want to carefully pick one. So.
But those are important for the people that are on the market now. So what about the people that will come into the market in 10 years' time? I have a 6-year-old, and he knows my iPhone way better than I do. He knows how to FaceTime everybody. My nieces, who are 23, if they have to call customer service, they're like, oh, I have to speak to a person? Can I just go type my question into, do you think that's going to change?
Well, I think it's kind of hard to look 10 years ahead, because technology, the whole world is changing so rapidly. So I don't know how the world looks like in 10 years, but I do think that humans are humans and they need personal connection. That has never changed. Even now, with people being on Instagram or whatever, so frequently when they're so young, they still need that personal interaction. I don't think that that's going to change. Not for me.
I think if we get back to fully working from the office, I think we will always need that human touch, or more and more. But in 10 years, maybe if we all work remote, there is a chance that we will fully replace with I don't know, remote hiring and no human interaction. But still, I don't think it's the way to go.
So from the conservative camp, if we put all our minds in the conservative camp for a second, the human interaction thing is the one we're most dear to, right? Is that?
I think you know, my perspective is that, and I definitely agree with Brad, you need both, right? So right now, I think I was on a call with the chief HR of Petit Bouton, which is a kids brand, and he mentioned that I hope this pandemic, you know, lasts a little bit longer because we're actually running a test, right? So a lot of companies are seeing, hey, we work from home, you know, if it's 6 or 9 months, we can actually have more data to say, you know what, it is a reality. So if it's a reality, then it means also from a hiring process perspective, you need to adjust to different scenarios. I've hired a lot of people who move from one country to another country without seeing the office, right? That happened, at least 50. So it's not,
Me too.
not impossible, right? So it just means that, okay, how can you facilitate and make sure somebody has a better sense of what they're getting themselves into? And I have a philosophy, my philosophy is that, you know, when I'm working on a role, my job is to make you go through a process that you can make a decision. It's not to get the job itself, but just do you want the job based on the conversations, seeing us, talking to different individuals. So that's actually my philosophy. So it means, how are we going to make sure that in the future, people have a better sense of what they're getting themselves into? Because if you know what you're getting yourself into, hopefully you will be also successful, right? I hate when a manager tells me, I didn't know I was getting myself into this. Well, you know, when I was a little bit younger, I didn't know the whole picture. But now I clearly paint the picture. So you know what you're getting yourself into. And I think that is also very important, let's say, moving forward.
And also be honest about it. Also the things that are maybe not the nice to have or whatever. So being transparent about the challenges and bottlenecks and those kind of stuff to manage expectations.
That's been what is interesting is that it's been like we've kind of I don't know, I'm relatively new to the space than you guys, and for me, employer value proposition as a term is something that's come up, right, and it's building a lot of steam and all that. And if you think about what it actually means, is does the candidate know who I am, right? And now what you're saying is this has got completely shattered by this inability to offer the guy a coffee when he gets into the building, or to show him the cool desks that we have that we spend money on, or that we value Friday night drinks or not, or whatever that might be. But that ability to communicate who you are now becomes way more interesting and way more valuable, and recruiters become more marketers, even more so than they had to be before. So tech talent became scarce and supply was short, so you have to be competing. But now not only do you need to compete, but you actually have to just create transparency luckily we have someone with a marketing background who's also done it. Does it make sense, that line of reasoning?
It does, and I love hearing the what about the candidate sort of, let's say, mindset here, because it is a two-way street. And I think if you're doing high volume, back to your point about technology, if you're doing high volume hiring, and there's a high churn rate, so if you're hiring, I don't know, Uber Eats delivery drivers, which my son is, then that's a different ballgame, right? But if you're hiring people who are going to be requiring a lot more nuance and emotional intelligence and all these other capabilities, then this more human touch needs to be there, as well as, I think what you're saying is this is a marketplace match, and a good match is one where both parties understand what they're getting themselves into, and they both do so with eyes wide open. They know where the hair is on this, and there are no surprises, or if there are surprises, they're sort of minimal surprises. I think what was interesting to hear you say was this person you've spoken to about this experiment running a little longer. Unfortunately, I think it will run longer. But what I've been hearing a little bit about, so my understanding is most of you are working in the top of the funnel when it comes to the employee lifecycle. That is bringing candidates into a match and a job offer, OfferZen, right? So, but then where I think it gets really super interesting in the world we're in now is how do you onboard people? Like, and how do you make sure that onboarding is a success where, okay, if you're a matchmaker and you've set up the perfect match, that's great, but then how do you make sure that that's nurtured in a way that actually is successful? And I don't know what your model is, but presumably the match success is actually important for retaining business and growing your business. And I think this notion of how do you onboard people and then how do you nurture them and how do you grow them and how do you make sure their first 6 months are amazing, I think this is still completely uncharted waters. I have no idea how this is going to happen.
So I'm thinking, do you guys have any things that you're itching to ask Brad that are just like, that's not in the topic that I'm kind of leading on? I just want to make sure you guys have the opportunity to surface things that's on your mind.
What do you think the HR space is lacking the most with the marketing background? I mean, what do you think is like a common mistake for a company looking at marketing, how to market your company? Your EVP?
It's a super good question, and I'll answer it in a way of pointing something out that I think is obvious to lots of people in this world, and that is that I tend to see two kinds of companies. One that sees HR as an administrative function, and one that sees HR as something strategic. And the second style company, they tend to talk about people. They tend to say I'm a head of people or a chief people officer, and the human resources word is find replaced for people. So it's sort of a bit of a dog whistle for the enlightened companies versus the non-enlightened companies. I think what's missing then is do the companies walk the walk when it comes to understanding the platitude that says people are our most important asset. I mean, you see this all the time on corporate literature and everything else. Putting that into action is incredibly difficult. One of the ways to do it is actually treat the function as strategic. And that means actually then making it a business function and not administrative only. Now you have to make sure the administration works. Everything, the payroll has to work, the legal has to work. I mean, everything has to be buttoned down. Nobody goes to jail. Like, that's important. But beyond that, it has to be how are we growing the business? So on the one hand, companies are lacking maybe the commitment to having, let's say, HR executives or people leaders at the table. Sometimes it's a late hire in a scale-up company. They hire somebody pretty late because they say, well, it's not that important. Well, when we have 200 people, we'll hire somebody pretty good. But until then, we don't need it. Outsource the payroll and we're fine. Outsource the recruiting, we're good. But then I think the flip side is that the people in these roles also have to adapt. And what I see too much of is that there are people who are career HR functional specialists who are great at what they do, but then they get to the table. Well, there's this whole narrative which is, how do I get a seat at the table? This is the question that HR functional people are asking all the time. And what I'm always saying is, getting to the table, I can get you to the table. Staying at the table is the hard part. And staying at the table means asking about the metrics, asking about the customer, asking about the product, like knowing the business, wondering about the financial statements, contributing to all of these different things, not just waiting for at the meeting and then there's a HR topic. Oh, now I engage. Too late. So both the company has to embrace it, and then the people who are in the position to actually embrace it have to then lean in and do it. And if that match happens, then you have a good setup. But absent that, then you're back to just administration world, and it's not that exciting.
And I think it's probably a nice segue into that. In its sense, is leading without formal authority, is bringing your voice to the table as your function and driving your business in a direction. So not necessarily leading people, but leading your organization as a whole and bringing that to the table. I think that's an interesting topic, especially in the tech world, as we see tech now driving so many businesses, and even just the biggest constraint to business growth being the number of people in a tech team, for instance. You can see that happening. We all see that happening a lot. Yeah.
So one of the things I love the most about coming from a business training role into an HR function was how often and easy it was to surprise people with basic stuff like doing an analysis or presenting a strategy or executing a pivot table. You know, it's like, people are like, wow, you can do a pivot table? I'm like, what? You can't? Like, what are you doing? Like, and this is not to say to paint HR people with a unfair brush, but there hasn't been a lot of investment into HR people having those kinds of skills. So, you know, therefore, what I liked is that it was relatively easy to stand out and to deliver something that people were not expecting. Oh, I thought you worked in HR. What are you doing now talking about business strategy or product roadmap or I don't know what else? It's like, well, last I saw that this was what our most important thing for our company, and therefore I'm in, you know, how can I help? Yeah. And I think that's also a mindset that sometimes is missing.
Cool, well, I think you're probably getting hungry. I know I am. 3.5 more hours. So I think from our side, we get the dinner going, take the conversation a bit more casual. So thanks so much for the participation and all the questions. Brad, thank you so much for sitting up here with me and chatting this through. Yeah, looking forward to continuing the conversation over dinner. Hopefully we'll get some of the thoughts that you brought to the table and you guys into some like blogs and some video and stuff and share that. And hopefully some people at home can learn something as well. So yeah, thanks very much, Brad. And good way to finish it. I was going to high five. Yeah, cool. So we'll sit down there now.